To our third session of the third day, the last day of iDTX 2022, and unfortunately for you all, it's time for my session. Now, please do be active in the chat. Do talk to me, because the last thing I want to do and the last thing you want to sit through is me talking for an hour. Least of all about this subject. So a little bit of background about me and about this session and why I'm running it, I guess. So I've called this session S.I.S.O audio production. And really that acronym at the start, S.I.S.O, is what this is all about. That is the message that I want you to walk away with today. Now, just to get this out there, I did get a message about some of the language used in a presentation that we've already had. This isn't an apology for that. This is a warning, an entirely fair and upfront warning that if you didn't like that, you are not going to like the core message of this presentation. There's nothing aggressive. There's nothing terrible about it, but just to put it out there, it may not be your cup of tea, and that's okay. So, why am I running this session? So my kind of original background, what I wanted to go and do right way back when I was sort of in school, was go into kind of audio production, lighting and sound technician, those kinds of roles. Didn't happen. The real world requires you to pay things like rent and buy inconveniences like food and stuff like that. But I was lucky enough back then to attend a lot of classes, go to a lot of courses with fantastic audio engineers all over the country. I was lucky enough to attend a college where there was fully kitted out sort of recording facilities, both for music and vocals and film, and got a lot of really good experience that I try to utilize when creating all of the learning content. Now, yesterday we had a fantastic session from Liam about podcasting being the kind of secret weapon in our arsenal for learning content. And I couldn't agree more. In fact, that actually led me to slightly rework this session. Firstly, because he covered some of the points that I was going to cover. Liam, we'll talk later. But more so because I really wanted to focus in on, now we know it is a really effective learning tool, and it really is. How can we make it viable? Not just in terms of top quality, but also, how much budget do you really have to spend? In most organizations, if you say, what's my audio visual budget? Someone will laugh at you. Maybe the comms team have some stuff. So I want to cover kind of 4 things that I'll go over today. And they're really the 4 things that I think you always need to consider in any project involving audio. So this will apply to podcasting, recording interviews, recording video in which there's going to be audio, recording in studios, recording screencasts. So you can really apply and adapt everything we're talking about to anything that involves recording audio. There are some slides, as you can see, but I don't like slides, partially because I don't like sitting through them, partially because I hate designing them. So there are very, very few, and there's not much on any of them, you'll be glad to hear. But we will also be jumping in to some software to actually look at some audio editing. I will put out now, the audio editor that I'm going to use is Adobe Audition. You don't have to use Adobe Audition. Everything that I do is to the point, uses tools that are going to be available in anything. From what we've got, Audition, you've got Pro Tools, you've got any of the open source softwares, you've got Ableton. Whatever you use is going to have the same tools because they all are really very much the same. I use Audition just because it's installed. So let's step in and take a little look. These are the 4 considerations that need to be made whenever you have a project involving audio. There we go. Audacity, prime example, open source, free, fantastic tool, and totally has everything that we're going to be talking about today when we get round to the post-production side of things. So 4 considerations: type, location, mic, and post. So type, really is talking about the type of audio you're recording. What's the situation? What's the background? What are we trying to achieve? Location, where are you recording it? Inside, outside, in an office, in a studio, in your office, in someone else's office. Lots of different considerations there. Mike, do you have the right tools for the job? Although I've called that step Mike, technically it's gear, I guess, would be a better term for it. General equipment. Morgan using Logic Pro, good stuff. I say good stuff. I despise Logic, but that's just because it comes from the world of Mac. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it at all, except that it comes from the world of Mac. And then for post-production, we'll look at that right towards not quite the tail end of the session, but later on in the session. And I know there's a lot around, post-production is where the magic happens. But that's actually one of the myths I want to dispel very early on. There is a reason 3 of the 4 considerations are not post-production editing magic. And will be that really harks back to the message of this session, S.I.S.O. And perhaps as you move forwards, some of you might start to guess what that stands for, and if not, I'll reveal it at the end. But without much more ado, let's jump in and look at the first consideration I've put here: type, and this totally off-brand character in the corner that looks cool. So type, what type of audio are you recording and how will it be listened to? This is the step that I certainly am terrible at overlooking, and have to really remind myself this is where it starts. This is, from a learning perspective, let's be honest, this is a little bit like a needs analysis, but hyper specific to audio production. So we should always shape our approach to audio for how it's going to be received. So is it part of a video? Is it standalone audio? If it's standalone audio, will it be downloaded and listened to, or will it be streamed? What kind of connection is it going to be streamed on? What kind of device? What kind of headphones or speakers is it going to be listened to through? Now, all these things have a massive impact. And let's actually start with that last one. Voiceover is another prime example. Claudine, your question about gear is, I'm definitely going to be talking about that. As someone who has far too much, you'll notice the case behind me. We're literally going to unpack my kit for recording for clients, which is all about not going past that kind of minimum viable product point, because there's just no value in it. But first of all, so if we're talking about type, whether it's video, voiceover, whatever it might be, I always start right at the far end, which is the end user, the audience. How will they be receiving this? And if the answer is, for instance, they're going to be listening, they're going to be streaming it to their included headphones that they happen to have with them from their smartphone or whatever it might be, well, that means what they're going to get is highly compressed, really relatively low quality audio, at least within the workplace. We're not going to be talking about high bitrate streaming. We're certainly not talking about full fidelity audio. And that allows us to start making some decisions. It means that it's very unlikely someone sat there listening, checking the audio when they're receiving it, really focusing on it in the same way we would if we were listening to, let's say, someone's latest album. If we notice a small discrepancy in volume levels or something like that, in that we're going to be onto it straight away, because we're listening for enjoyment, as it were. If, however, as I said, it's workplace, relatively low quality headphones streamed over a workplace internet connection, you've got some flex going on here. Now we say it's part of a video. Okay, so that introduces some interesting elements, like how many people are speaking on this? Is there background noise? Do we want background noise? Are we adding sound effects or folio? There are lots of different considerations, especially when video comes into play. Voiceover is I would argue, the easiest type of audio to plan for, because it is going to be inherently very controlled. It's separated from the rest of the process. You usually either voice over and then say animate to it if you're doing animated content, or voice over an existing piece of video. You very rarely live voice over something, unless, of course, it's kind of like a spectator sport, let's say, at which point, again, there's very different considerations and not really something L&D has to contend with. So, although we don't have any definitive answers at this stage, it's really important that we spend the time to understand the context in which everything else sits. What is the overall product versus just the audio product? If it's a podcast, of course, audio is the whole product. So let's move on from type and this off-brand dude to a screen that I put slightly more time and effort into. Location. Location is the next key consideration, and arguably is going to have the single biggest impact on the end quality of your audio. And I'd love to say it was buying expensive gear or be amazing post-production wizard, but it's not. It's location, location, location. And more specifically, it's about the ambient noise, the noise floor, and the acoustics of said location. So regardless of what type of type of audio you're recording, there is going to be some acoustic control that you need to exert. Now, often the kind of the go-to thought is, I'll find a quiet space, and quiet is great, but control is key. So when I talk about control, I'm talking about, you might have some noise, but can you do something about it? Are you in a space where you can be sure you're not going to be interrupted? Are you in a space where any kind of background noise is consistent? And what can you do to control the acoustics of a room? Oh, there's a really good question, actually. A couple of really good comments here. Morgan, I could never voice over live. No, I agree. I think that's I think those who do it are extremely brave. Jane records voiceover separate to the recording. I very much agree. Yeah, I do the same. Claudine, really good question, actually. Maybe it's not a Captain Obvious question at all, because there is no right answer to this. But do you do voice or animation first? Everyone has their own approach. Personally, if it's animation, what I tend to do is kind of figure out what I want to happen and what the script's going to be, then record the voiceover, and then have the animator create to the voiceover and the soundtrack as a whole. I have found that that's the easiest way to do it, because in what, to me, and it's entirely personal, what's good animation, the audio sells it. So whether it's a gag line or getting the right beats and rhythm and feel to how it's progressing, it's easier to do that in audio first and then time your animation. If you animate it first, your voiceover artist is kind of trying to sync to the kind of the machine work, as it were, the animation work, rather than following a more natural pace. And it's far easier to animate to voiceover than it is to voiceover pre-existing animation. You sometimes you can't avoid it. Translation is a prime example of when you actually sometimes have to do it the other way. It might have originally been in English. I had this recently, originally in English, and then it had to be redubbed into German. Now, German, generally speaking, takes much longer to read the same script, or much longer, a little bit longer. That becomes a more serious thing when you're trying to put that onto a pre-existing animation, and it puts a lot of pressure onto the voiceover artist to speak very quickly whilst maintaining clarity. There you go. Morgan works the same way, so animates after voiceover recording. Yeah. Again, I found it to be the best way to work, but I would, especially if you are getting into it yourself, I think especially if you're voiceovering yourself, you have more leeway because you have more of a feel for it. If you're doing the animation and the VO, you can adjust as you go. Whereas if you're in a production workflow and you've, let's say, got 20, 30 animations to get done, you can't go backwards and forwards tweaking. And you don't want to do that too much anyway, because it eats your time. So yeah, there was one really good thing there. I think Jane said had to find out what the bus timetable was. This is the kind of small consideration. Yeah, if you have a really controlled space, you maybe don't have to concern yourself with it. But if you're recording audio on set or on an external location, that becomes a huge deal. If you're ever recording somewhere that is not internal and you're outside in any way, shape, or form, go there at the same sort of time of day, at a weekday or weekend, based on when you're going to be recording, and suss out what the noise level is like. Are there 50, 60 people walking up and down pavements at a time? Is this a trucking route? These are important things to know because they are going to massively impact the audio that you capture on the day and what tools you may or may not need. Now, I touched on acoustics really briefly there, and this is a point I really, really want to stress because I feel like if people are interested in audio, acoustics is a bit like the dark arts of audio production, but the principles are really very simple. Voices are filled with kind of mid-range and higher end frequencies, and they bounce around a lot. If they hit flat surfaces like walls, windows, ceilings, they bounce back. And these are called reflections. And when the mic picks up on them, that's what gives you reverb or that kind of echoey, spacey feel that isn't very pleasant. It sounds basically unprofessional. And when we talk about acoustic treatment or sound treatment, what we're actually talking about is diffusing or absorbing those sound waves to stop them reflecting back. Now, the Google way of doing this is to cover your room in that horrible eggshell foam that's really cheap, looks awful, and if I'm honest, is not very effective. The reason people end up covering their rooms with it is because you have to do that to get any result out of the stuff because it's really not up to the job. And what you then end up with is actually you create a dead space where there is no natural reverb, and that can sound really unnatural because there is no way normally you would hear someone speak with no reverberation. Our voices are always bouncing off something. There's always some level of background noise. Jane's making a really good point here. Seen some amazing vocal booths on social media, but they cost insane money. Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, I think if voiceover, for instance, is your career, it's an investment and you're paying for the simplicity of get in the booth, shut the door, it's ready to go. You've got control. Realistically, though, most of us are not going to buy that. And often, I mean, if you're recording a conversation between 5 or 6 people for a podcast, or you're recording an on-set event like a conference, let's say an in-person conference when they happen again, you don't have the option of making every speaker stand in a booth and re-record their audio. So what we're really looking for is how do we control those reflections? So the ones I always focus on are primary reflections, secondary reflections, and bass. So let's look at each one of those. Primary reflections are literally whatever is right in front of you that is going to bounce the sound straight back. You want to diffuse or absorb everything going that way that's behind your microphone. Now, we can offset some of that when we talk about gear and we talk about the microphones that we choose, but in the meantime, dead in front of you is where you want something. Whether that's going to be cheap, nasty foam, but I'd advise against it, or you can get things like absorption screens that sit behind the microphone, or you can get panels like the ones you see on the wall behind me, which are like this, and these are compressed fiber. Or, because there are just endless options, you can buy sound panels or acoustic panels, as they're called. These are the most expensive approach. They are also one of the most effective approaches. However, you don't have to do any of that. What you can do, and I can already see Jane's with me on this, you can hang a towel or a cushion directly in front of you behind the microphone. Thick, dense fabric absorbs sound. It prevents it bouncing back at you. That is all we need. Um, a really good way of creating this as well, if you don't want to hang towels and put cushions up, although I still do on occasion when needed, are acoustic blankets, sound blankets. You can pick them up at most musical instrument stores or order them online. Heavy moving blankets do exactly the same job at about a quarter of the price. And the great thing about those blankets is they're usually sort of like big 2 meters by 1.5 meters, great big bits of fabric. So you can fold them up smaller when you need them smaller, but also when you run onto things like, oh, you're recording on set or at an event, you can hang them. You can hang them on kind of poles or, as I often use, the kind of cheap on wheels clothes racks that you can buy for like £10 rather than buying expensive media production C stands. You can drape them over that and just place them around the room. If you've got a speaker on stage, adding a few of those around, sort of behind the audience, even can make a huge difference. Because whilst they're acting as absorbers to both the noise from beyond the area and what's coming away from the stage, they're also making use of the audience. So as those sound waves hit the audience are all different shapes and sizes, and they're not all one block, they're not flat, and therefore they're going to start diffusing and breaking up the sound wave as it hits them. So then we've got both diffusion and absorption for our primary reflections. Secondary reflections are what happens when the prime this is where it gets slightly more complicated, when your primary reflections go past you, straight behind you, and bounce off whatever's behind you. So this is why, for instance, in this room, I have those panels back there. They're great for secondary. I probably wouldn't use things like that for primary. The issue in this room is the glass whiteboard over here. That is not ideal, which is why I always try and speak this way. So my primary is going into diffusion and absorption, and my secondary is mostly going into absorption back there. All of that said, you don't have to permanently change a room. Hang up a blanket, or as I've seen recently, grab your sofa cushions and just make a little booth around your microphone. That works. That's a-okay. Ultimately, it will work fine. Egg tray carton is a common acoustic material in some situations, as Mohammed said. Yeah, absolutely. So that's diffusion. So that will break up the wave. It's certainly going to do part of the job. Again, I think it's the only issue with it again is if you're in a nice controlled space, it works fine. If you're recording on set or traveling, it's sometimes not as viable. But the key thing about all of this is just understanding how much you can and can't control. And if you have no acoustic control, no background sound level control, you really need to challenge people around, why are we recording audio here? Because it's all very well to go, the magic of post-production. Post-production isn't magic. Post-production can elevate your work. It cannot fix a bad recording. A bad recording, like genuinely bad, will always be bad. You can make it better. You can perhaps get it to the point where it's passable, but passable really should not be what we're aiming for. So we've spoken about location, and we've touched very briefly on the basics of acoustics, and I would stress they are the basics of acoustics. There are scientists whose entire kind of careers are dedicated to this topic, and I'm not one of them. So I'm sure they would have a field day tearing apart what I've said, but the basics are all there. Deal with your primary, deal with your secondary. I didn't mention bass. Basically, bass is bad. Especially in small rooms. So you can basically, what you want to do is create something called bass traps. And these are just bigger absorbent forms that sit in the corners of rooms, which tend to be where, because bass travels further as a lower frequency, it bounces around in the corners of your room. So if you're ever recording and you think this recording's very heavy on the low end, it feels muddy, almost kind of like there's a lot getting in the way of the clarity of the voice, you probably got bass bouncing around all over the place. And just putting some cushions or big absorbent blocks of foam, or buying a bass trap, if you want to invest the money to put in the corners of rooms, will clear that up for you. But that is one of the few things we can do quite a bit about in post-production. So I would say deal with your primary and secondary reflections as a kind of minimum. If you have the time and the energy and then the money, sometimes bass would be the next thing to deal with. Let's move on. If you've got questions, guys, please do just interrupt. There's no issue just jumping in. I'm happy to talk about anything else. So let's talk about gear, and let's start with my favorite topic, which is microphones, because I have far too many of them and I like talking about them far too much. Here we go. This is a great question, actually. So if you got into a play tent and sat in it and spread some heavy blankets, I'm wondering if that would help acoustics. It would give you loads of control. Absolutely. I think adding the acoustic blankets there, or some big heavy blankets, would work really well. A duvet would do a great job, as long as it's a fairly thick duvet. Yeah, I think that's a prime example of where you could try it out, and chances are, if you happen to have one already, it costs you nothing. And I think that would be something I would definitely encourage when it comes to sound treatment, and especially within your own home. Just try stuff out, working on the principle of what's my voice going to bounce off and where's it going to go. Get those places dealt with and see what works, see what materials you do have without spending a penny. I know, so there we go. Jane knows someone who used a couple of opened umbrellas. Yeah, absolutely. This is it. Anything that's going to break up that sound, those standing waves, is going to help you out. There's really no set rules. Once you understand that basically what you're trying to do is stop the sound waves continually moving backwards and forwards over the mic, just apply that basic principle. Thick materials will absorb more. Thicker materials, though, beyond a certain point, will start to cause bounces themselves. It's just finding that happy medium between the two. Great stuff. And if you do start trying things out, let me know. Send me some photos. It'll be great. We can do a whole thing. We do have an IDT Discord where you can share your thoughts and ideas. It's a little bit quiet at the minute, but we're going to be doing some stuff in there over the coming weeks. So yeah, microphones. So for those, just a real kind of crash course in microphones, I guess. This is very high level, so I apologize. If people aren't interested in this, let me know. Because I don't want to spend time on stuff people aren't interested in at all. Microphones basically come in 3 flavors: dynamic, condenser, and ribbon. Dynamic microphones are really durable, great for recording kind of anything, but especially if you've got kind of unpredictable amplitudes, which is volume basically, going on. So if you've got people who sometimes speak quite softly and then sometimes get louder and louder and louder as they go, or they get more energetic, or they move to and from the mic a lot, they can be quite difficult to work with. Dynamic microphones are the way to go. They're also physically durable. They can be beat up on a lot. They're ideal for live performances, stages, and going off and recording basically in the middle of nowhere, because they require very little power. In fact, the moment you plug them in, they're gonna work, because they only require the power that an XLR lead carries directly from the audio interface that you're using, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Condenser microphones. So these are they're often referred to as studio microphones. So these would include, in fact, there you go. Here's a kind of classic condenser microphone. It was just vocal microphone, a studio singer's microphone. These work completely differently to the dynamic microphone. These are incredibly delicate. They break very easily, but they capture an incredible amount of detail. I plug this in, for instance, I can hear the floorboards creak next door. It will pick up everything, which sometimes is great, but it means you need control over the space that you're in. Otherwise, you will have a lot of cleaning up to do. So they'll capture literally all the detail in the world, but they also require additional power. And the reason for that is that while the dynamic microphone kind of uses what we all assume to be the kind of normal microphone, in that there's a diaphragm inside, you speak, the air moves, the diaphragm moves, that moving sends a signal down, it's converted to an electric signal, off it goes. This uses two metal plates near each other. As they move, the signal between them changes. That's what goes. Far more delicate, far more detail, far easier to break, and more post-production required. Doesn't make them a bad microphone. Again, you just need to consider the type of audio you're recording and the location in which you're recording it. So as a brief example, this is the Rode NT1A. If you Google condenser microphone or low cost vocal mic, this will come up. And it's a bargain, to be honest. It's a fantastic piece of kit. I personally don't advise it unless you have good control over the area that you're recording in, and B, are already pretty confident in post-production, because you are pretty much always going to have to do some background clear up with this thing. Another example of a condenser mic would be something like this, which is a boom microphone. So this sits above my desk when I'm recording and don't want a microphone near me. I do a lot of the YouTube videos using this. This particular one is a Sennheiser MKE600. So it's a relatively low cost boom mic. All the same issues that you have with the other condenser microphone in terms of background noise, cleanup required, that kind of thing. This has the benefit of being a shotgun mic and is very directional. So thus I can have it just up here, out of view, no microphone in the scene. The kind of boom approach is very much what you see in TV, movie sets, when you're not going to have a microphone shoved in someone's face the whole time. They want it out of shot. Examples of dynamic microphones, what you see down here. So this is kind of quintessentially the dynamic microphone, the Shure SM7B, and is entirely wasted on internet conversations like this, because the compression of an internet sort of streaming signal means that the difference between this, which is a really expensive microphone, or really in the world of microphones it's not, it's expensive for me, let's put it that way. It's one of the more expensive mics that I own, but there is very little difference in the sounds that you would hear between this and something a quarter of the price. And to fill those kinds of gaps, we've got mics like these. This is all Rode stuff, actually. So we've got over here, we have the Rode Pod mic. The Rode Pod mic, as you can see, takes some design inspiration, shall we say, from the SM7B. But these are fantastic because these are £100 per microphone. That is an absolute bargain for a high-end XLR microphone. One of the things that I really like about this microphone, actually, is having played around with them a little bit. With a little bit of tweaking in post-production, the average person will not be able to tell the difference between this at £100 and an SM7B at £400 to £500. There's really no need to buy an expensive microphone unless you're operating in a studio environment, producing audio for audiophiles, or you just like buying expensive equipment. I fall into the last category there. If you want something sort of next step up from this, you've got things like the Rode Podcaster. This is a really fantastic microphone. It's about £120, so you're not talking about much more, but just has the slight edge in terms of clarity, and actually has an inbuilt pop filter inside it. And as Liam kind of touched on, pop filters are there to prevent plosives. So plosives are where you make those kind of sounds when lots of air comes out at a very high rate, hits the microphone, causes it to make a popping sound. So whenever you hear that on a recording, usually means someone is either too close to the microphone or they have what's called a bad microphone technique. So you'll notice, for instance, that this microphone here is not straight in front of me. It's slightly below and down and pointing up. So it's getting the full blast, or not the full blast, but it's getting 99% of my voice as my voice travels past it, but I'm not facing directly down into it. That means that if I do create a plosive, it's not going straight into the microphone, it's going past the microphone. And that's a really quick, easy trick to just avoid ever capturing any unnecessary noise. You see it used in a lot of recording studios, especially with condenser microphones, because they're very, very sensitive to it. So the best thing you can do is actually have the microphone here. If you're going to have it really close, like, in singers and their music videos get about an inch away from the microphone, and what you can't see is the audio engineer crying because they're seeing it used that way. But just having it off to the side slightly, you're still going to capture all the sound. It's going to be perfectly clear, but you're not going to get those plosives as the air goes past the microphone rather than into it. That trick alone will save you a lot of re-records, because there's really no good way of dealing with it, because the microphone will clip, and once it clips, you've just got noise in your recording until it comes back down. So those are microphones. There is the third category here called ribbon mics, and you can see I've just put nope, because there is no way anyone in our space should be using them. They are incredibly tetchy, delicate, complicated to use. They break almost every time you use them, because they're exactly what they're done. They have a tiny little ribbon of corrugated metal that moves around inside. This is a really old school technology that we've moved away from. Buying a ribbon mic now is unusual. You have to go out of your way to buy one. These are the kind of the mics that the likes of Elvis Presley would have been recording on. It was the kind of cutting edge of technology back then. We really have moved on now, but it's a very specific sound. So I suppose if you want to capture that, go for it. I wouldn't, because they're difficult to work with. So we're not going to spend too much longer on gear, but I just want to talk about another consideration about microphones, because microphones are ultimately the tool where you capture your sound from. These are called pickup patterns. And for those who have ever looked at magnets, you might recognize these kinds of shapes. So there are other pickup patterns, but these are arguably the most common. So we've got cardioid, omnidirectional, and figure of 8. Cardioid, the idea is that it's pointing at the person. So what I'm using here is a cardioid mic. It picks up what comes into the front of it, this large sort of the tip of the heart, as it were, on the diagram you're seeing, and then the sides get a little bit and the back gets very little, and we call that rejection. And the idea is that if there's anything else going on that's not directly coming into the microphone, it's not going to pick it up. So that's why when I'm doing this kind of thing, for instance, I'm not using my overhead mic today. Because being a condenser microphone, although it is sort of quite a good shotgun mic, so it does direct the sound, the capture at me, there are a couple of things going on in this room. So my video, for instance, today runs out from my camera, goes through an Atmos Ninja before going into the computer. That does mean that creates a little bit of fan noise, but it's directly behind the mic, so this rejects it. Behind me, there's actually also quite a annoyingly loud today, actually, network switch that runs the internet connections to the house. So what I don't want is a microphone that's going to pick that up from over in the corner. So a cardioid, or in this case, what's actually a hypercardioid, so a very tight pattern, means it just captures this little bit coming out of the front of the microphone. Now, an omnidirectional mic is exactly what it sounds like. It captures everything in all directions. these microphones, although that sounds terrible, are very handy when miking a room. So if, for instance, you've got an in-person stage event and you just want to capture everything that's going on, a couple of omnidirectional microphones on the stage and throughout the room can be a super effective way of doing that. They're also really great if you're miking up for musicians, or just for capturing meetings, to be honest. Then figure of 8 is, well, exactly what it sounds like. If you imagine a microphone set up like this would pick up, that would pick up, but this wouldn't, down here wouldn't, and underneath wouldn't. Very useful if, for instance, you're putting a microphone in between two people. Just makes good sense. This isn't actually a figure of 8 microphone. This is very much a cardioid. You speak into the end there. And that, interestingly, is probably the single biggest mistake people make with microphones, is they buy them and they speak into the wrong bit. Especially where some microphones look like they, for instance, this has these nice grills on the side. It would be very easy to think, oh yeah, speak into these bits, but no, you speak into the end. Same with all these microphones. Actually, broadly speaking, my collection is very cardioid focused, because I like to get very clean audio recordings, which is again a lot of what we're talking about today. Question here about microphones. Impressive collection of microphones. Where do you keep them at night? That's actually one of the things I'll touch on, because there was a question earlier about what's the kind of minimum kit, and the minimum kit is what I take when I go and record clients. And what I take are these Rode Pod mics, which are about £100 each. I keep 4 of them. And that's because 4 is about as many people as I ever think I'm going to be recording at once. You don't need 4. If you're only ever recording one person, buy 1. I always say get whatever it is that you need to start with. Don't look to build kind of the optimum kit from day one. So I use that. Now, there's 2 different ways you can go after that point. If you've got some budget, buying something like the Rode Procaster is a fantastic investment, because it is an all-in-one recording solution. It'll act as your interface, it'll act as your recorder. You can even apply some certain corrective effects there and then on it, and save it all to an SD card or plug it into a computer and use it as a direct interface. But that is a more expensive option. What I tend to take with me, when I don't want to unplug that and take it somewhere, is a very, very cheap, really quite low end actually, USB mixer. So this is, what is it, a Sub-Zero mix with a USB connection. So this just allows me to plug the microphones in, get a signal out of them, record it through USB to my laptop. Very, very simple. And this is less than £100, I know that. But ultimately, any audio interface that has the right number of inputs, I would say if you're going to buy an audio interface, try and buy one with at least 4 XLR or microphone ports, because it's unlikely you're ever going to need more than 4 at the same time. But 2, I mean, the one that I have on my desk now, only has 2, but when dealing with clients, I like to take one with 4 just in case. And then just some mic stands, at which point I would buy the cheapest mic stands you can possibly get. Yeah, I think Jay makes a really good point. Starting out, smartphone earbuds and mic are decent, absolutely. And I would say, I think Liam did a great job touching on this sort of thing yesterday, is the right microphone to start recording stuff with is whatever you already have. That's absolutely the case. You will definitely see an improvement in quality as you invest in equipment. And certainly, again, my kind of approach very much focuses on client work. So the consideration there is, would a client be happy if you turned up and went, just use the microphones that you've got, kind of thing? That's where I come from. But if you're recording for you or internally, and especially while you're learning and trying things out, there's no need to invest in equipment straight away. You should only invest in equipment when you are sure you're going to get value back out of it. So I say, oh, this mic's only £100. But if I pay £100 for it and then use it twice, and actually I could have just used something I already had for free and got the exact same result, that is 100% wasted money, even though it's been used. You only want to invest in equipment when you know you need it and you're going to be able to get value out of it. That's the advice I give and never follow myself. Morgan makes a great point as well. Dynamic mics are great when in a noisy environment. Exactly that. They really help cut out the sound around them. When it gets to post, we'll talk about one difference you will see between the two recordings. But I'm aware that I don't want to spend the whole session just talking about gear. But if anyone's got any specific questions, anything they want to chat about in terms of that, hit me up anytime. I will happily go for days on equipment and what's good and what's not and what's good for different scenarios. Morgan makes a really great point here, actually, that the Rode Smart Lav to use with a smartphone can be a really good first upgrade. That's absolutely true. So this is one type of microphone I haven't really spoken about, which is a lavalier microphone, which are the little clip-on ones that you can wear. You quite often see TV presenters wearing them. And the Smart Lav is great because it just literally goes to a TRS jack, so you can plug it into your phone, except phones don't often have those now, but you can get the little connectors usually that plug into the bottom, USB-C or Lightning, and go that way. You've also then got lavalier microphones that are wireless. So this is the one time I don't recommend Rode, actually, is that their wireless Go mics. I've not had great experiences with them. But DJI recently released a phenomenal low-cost pair of lavalier microphones. They're now my go-to. Certainly if I'm ever recording just two people having a chat, sort of conference style with a jug of water in the middle, sat on some chairs, I'll put a lavalier microphone on each of them and get two very clean lines of audio back. And that really is the kind of last point to touch on here, is that when you're recording audio, the gold standard, the thing you really want to try and get when you get to the end of the recording session, is a clean recording of each individual voice. Whenever possible. Now, it's not always possible, but whenever it is, that should be what you aim for. Because if you've got a dirty, messy recording with reverb and background noise, or it's cutting out, or the person's mumbling, or they're fiddling with a mic, that's the only downside with lavalier microphones, is people have a horrible tendency to fiddle with them or forget they're there and brush themselves and all this kind of thing. The cleaner that recording is, the easier your job is going to be. Remember, we're going to come back to it at the end, S.I.S.O. And I'm sure some people have probably already guessed what it means. So, post-production. Editing is about lifting, not correcting. A bad recording will always be bad. This was a lesson I had drummed into me by one particular editing engineer who would literally refuse to edit anything that was not well recorded. That was his stand. He's like, I take pride in my work. I will not edit bad audio because it will always be bad and it makes me look bad. Now, to be clear, there are a lot of amazing audio editing tools out there. They're fantastic. Do you really want to spend half your life trying to clean up background noise? Do you really want to spend your time individually trying to pick out plosive moments to edit them out of audio? Let me tell you, you don't. So what I want to show you really is how to take a very simple, reasonable quality audio recording and edit it so that it just sounds professional and clean. So let me open up Adobe Audition, which I really should have already had open. I'm terrible when it comes to planning my own sessions. We're going to share screen. We're going to share Adobe Audition. I'm just going to move you guys over to the other screen. So if you do have any questions, let me know. And in fact, what I might do is just move that around a little bit so it's a little bit easier for you to see. So first things first, we need to record some audio. There we go. I'm just going to record this now. So radio voice is on, everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. There we are. So we've got our waveform in front of me. And what we're going to be following, I just need to grab my notes to always remind myself and make sure I'm actually walking you through it step by step. We're going to be following the ENCN method. And that is equalize, normalize, compress, normalize. These 4 steps are the way to make a nice bit of audio that's well recorded, but not maybe perfect. Just sound that little bit crisper, that little bit more professional. So first thing we're going to do is just clear this up, get rid of these frazzly end pieces, as I call them. And I'm realizing now that you're not going to be able to hear this. So bear with me just one moment. Go to there, share screen, screen 1, and share system audio. There we go. So if you could just confirm that you guys can hear this. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. So there is our current audio. What we aren't really seeing here, though, is what the amplitude
Welcome,
is
ladies
like.
and gentlemen, to this.
So actually, it's looking pretty good. That's because I was probably quite loud when I recorded it, to be honest. But what you will often find is dynamic microphones tend to record a little bit quieter than your condenser counterparts. Brilliant. Yep. Seeing that, yes, people can hear it. Marvelous. Yes, the screen is rather wide, Morgan. I kind of didn't consider that. I probably should have loaded it up on a slightly more sensibly proportioned screen, but that's okay. We'll keep going. It's all good. Anyway, let's start off with our first step, which is normalize. Normalizing is basically about creating a standardized volume or a standard maximum volume for your recording. It means that everything stays the same. So we'll go to amplitude and compression, and we'll go to normalize. Now, I tend to normalize to -1 dB. Everyone has their own approach on this, though. I know some will take it to 0.6. I find that to be a little bit close to clipping. Some people take it to like -3 and work on it much quieter and bring it up at the end. It's all about finding your own approach. I would say, especially within the ENCN method, there is a lot of space for you to play. So let's do that. And you can immediately see this has been significantly lifted. This is now going to be much louder. So I apologize if it blows anyone's ears out. If you're listening in headphones really loud, now's the time to turn them down. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. So deliberately, when I was recording this, I tried to put some dynamic movement in there. So we can see here, we have some pretty high peaks, and here we have some much quieter pieces. Now, this is really common when recording people, because in conversation, we have a kind of natural ebb and flow, a way we speak, especially when, like me, you're trying to sound apparently like you're trying to sell something cheap on the radio. So next step, now that we've normalized, is equal. In fact, I've done the steps the wrong way around. I should have equalized first. I'm terrible for that. I tend to jump straight to normalize. So let's equalize first, shall we? When we equalize, which is the E, I tend to use the parametric equalizer because it gives you the most control without being unnecessarily complicated. So this is what an equalizer looks like. So when playing with an equalizer, the important thing to remember is a little movement is a lot of change. And just for those who maybe don't know, when we're talking about equalizers, what we're talking about is altering the amplitude of different frequencies. So how much of a certain frequency we're hearing in the end result. So this line here isn't a cutoff line, it's what we're boosting or reducing. So at the moment, this is completely flat, so we're just letting it play as recorded. So if we just play that, here you can see the waveform. First thing I'm going to do is actually roll off a lot of this bass. Remember earlier we were talking about how you can fix a lot of bass or muddiness in post? Well, we're going to do that with what's called a high pass filter. If you're using Audition, you add that by just clicking the HP, and you can see here the little point called HP, and now it's rolling off all of this bass sound here. It also tells me what frequency in hertz it's actually rolling off at here, so 40. Now, anything under 105, you're not going to be able to hear. So what I do straight away, if I start playing this, I'm going to roll this up until it starts to sound tinny. And you'll see what I mean. And I'm going to pull it back so it's just before the point when it starts to sound tinny. So here we go. If I were to push this all the way up to here, this is what it would sound like. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. Well, very kind of ham radio-esque. If that's the effect you're looking for, that's how you get it. But we're not looking for that. So what we're going to do... Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. So welcome. About 105, pretty much spot on. But you can see what this is doing, ladies and gentlemen, cutting out this test, all this muckiness down here. And you can see where the voice is really kicking in with this peak going on here. So we've rolled off that bass that's just making it sound a little bit dirty on the lower end. And now what we're actually going to do is provide a little bit more presence, a little bit more high end to the voice. That's going to take it from being a fairly flat recording to just giving it that little bit of edge. So let's do that. Audio for iDTX 2022. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX. So can you see the difference there? You can especially hear it on those T's. They just sound that little bit crisp, that little bit of a t on the end of them. And that just elevates it from being fairly flat, decent recording, but flat, to having that little edge. So let me play it without the equalizer for a moment, just by turning it off. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. And now with the EQ. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. Now, it's slightly extreme on the high-end boost there, but you can hear the difference. You can hear how just that little bit of a change can make a huge, huge difference. So let's apply that for now. You can see that's really changed the waveform there. Now we've done E, so now I'm going to go to amplitude compression, normalize, and normalize to 1 dB. It's not moved as much now, which is great. The next step, and I'm aware we are running close on time, so I will go through quickly, but we've got a little bit of wiggle room anyway. Next thing is compression. So for those who don't know, compression is exactly what it sounds like. It squeezes your audio. It basically moves your very top peaks, like this bit here, closer to where your smaller areas are and brings them up. The idea is basically consistency. It also just tidies up any odd little spikes that you've got, because you can see even within these big spikes, there are little moments where it's significantly more. And that's where you can create things like sibilance. So sibilance is especially prevalent on S's, which is convenient given its name. And it's that kind of ringing edginess that just isn't pleasant to hear in a microphone. And some voices are just inherently more sibilant than others. If you do have a sibilant voice, it's a fantastic word, sibilant, basically you live with it. You can get coaching, but just compress your audio and you'll be fine. So We're going to go amplitude and compression, and my favorite compressor is actually hidden away within the dynamics tool. We're going to take that back to default. We're going to turn compressor on. I'm going to leave this all completely as standard, but make the ratio 2. Ratio of 1 will literally do nothing. So always just set the ratio to 2 as a starting point. That means for every bit of change it's making, it's doing kind of 2-to-1 reduction, and then we'll see what that sounds like. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. And without. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. It's a very small change, but it's just noticeable. It just tidies everything up. So we're going to apply that. You can see the difference it's made there now. Our peaks are much less prevalent. Our sort of dips are far more in line. As a whole, this now sounds... I don't want to do that. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. We've still got dynamic movement, but it's much more professional, much more produced. And then finally, we just want to bring that back up because it's looking a little bit quiet.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for
audio. We want to bring that back up just by normalizing again. Back to 0.1. And let's play. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this test audio for iDTX 2022. And there we are. EN, CN. Equalize, normalize, compress, normalize. As long as you've got a good quality recording, that's all the editing you need to do to a vocal line. Now, let me just go back to my slides for a moment to finish this off. I'm aware we've run over, but don't worry. The next presenter is an absolute pro, so he will adapt and overcome, unlike I have. So, right at the start, I said this whole session was about one thing. S.I.S.O. Shit in, shit out. That is the truth of audio production. You will not take an awful piece of audio and make it sound good. It's just professionals refuse to do it because it's a waste of time. This is what that funnel looks like. Poor quality, reverb, background noise, plosives. Step 1, hours of editing, noise gates, background noise processing, denoising processes, followed by more editing, EQ, compression, normalization, and more noise processing. Followed by even more editing. And that's basically when you throw anything left on the effects rack at it in the hope that it will improve things, and then you put an over-the-top master onto it. And then what comes out at the end is still shit. That is the reason post-production is not magic. Now, you saw there, decent recording, 4 quick things, sounds great. Not perfect, I would change around with that EQ a bit more, but we were in a little bit of a rush. Just take the time to make a good quality recording in the first place, and you won't need to go through the S.I.S.O. funnel. Finally, Instructional Design Tips is my YouTube channel. That's what today is kind of sort of, let's say, funded by. The YouTube don't pay us, but our fantastic patrons made everything possible. The biggest thing you can do to help make these events a reality again in the future, support everything I'm doing, is go and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. All the talks are going to be there by the end of today as recordings. You can watch them whenever you want. And of course, if there's anything you want to know about audio production, whether it's a chat, whether it's about gear, whether it's about editing, whether you want to jump on a quick call and work on something together, more than happy to do that anytime. Just give me a shout. We've also got some videos going up over the next month about the audio production process. So if it's something you're interested in, make sure you follow along with those. Now, I have run over, so I'm going to say, if you've got questions, message me, and I will do a catch-up video of any questions you may have and post it up to the channel in the middle of the week with any questions that I'm sent, rather than taking up more time now. But thank you ever so much for joining me. Hopefully this session was useful in some way, and that no one's too bothered about my use of language there. I'm not bothered. I just like to think that people have a smile on their face at the end. So thank you again. I'm going to go welcome the next presenter on, and we will see you again very, very soon.